Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending my talk. I hope you all had a good lunch. Also, thanks to everyone involved with helping get this event organized. Tiny games, huge joy. I'm going to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. But first, I should probably introduce myself so you know who I am. My name is Mathijs Koning. I am currently the course leader of the game development program that we offer at the The Hague University. My background is in more traditional software engineering, but I recently completed my master's degree in indie game development at the University of Falmouth in England. And that gives me kind of a nice segue into why I am here. So what am I going to talk about? For the thesis I did for my master's degree, I decided to do a weird experiment in which I decided to make 12 games in 12 weeks. And if you're like, that's insane, you're correct. It absolutely is. So I'm basically here to talk about why I put myself through something like that, how I approached it, and all the lessons that I learned from doing this fun little experiment. And whether or not I would recommend it, so no spoilers yet. So why did I decide to do this? Well, I suppose none of you will argue that making games is hard. It takes a lot of discipline, it takes a lot of creativity, whether working solo or in a team. And finishing a game is kind of a small miracle every single time it happens. I don't know who to correctly attribute this quote to, but making a game basically takes forever or one messed up weekend. And that's very much true. So I basically decided to put myself through 12 messed up weekends to see what I would learn from that experience. The problem with making games is because it's quite hard, it's not always fun. At some point, we have to do the tasks that we've been postponing for months, and then we don't really want to do that anymore because there's a new shiny idea in our head that we would rather spend the effort on, and then we end up not finishing anything. However, I think it's very important as a creative person and as a game developer to learn how to finish stuff. There is a lot of gratification and satisfaction to get from finishing a project, sharing it with others, seeing their response. You can get a lot of cool feedback and just enjoy that moment. And we kind of rob ourselves from that joy if we don't end up finishing our games. I kind of blame Tony Hawk Pro Skater because every one of us always have wanted to learn how to do a kickflip. But in order to be able to do a kickflip, you have to go through the grind, pun intended, of running on the pavement, hitting your head, getting back on the board and trying it again. Because we're not going to do a kickflip on our first try. We first need to get down all the basics and go through the process of learning how to learn tricks. So as long as we enjoy falling off our skateboard and hitting the pavement with our head, we're eventually going to get to that kickflip, but it takes a lot of work to get there. So for me, that kind of boiled down to we as game developers need to learn how to fail, and we need to learn how to enjoy that process, because otherwise we're never going to make the next Stardew Valley, which unfortunately is never going to be the first game that we make. We have to go through all the other stuff to eventually get to our little gem. So for my experiment, I decided to set myself 2 goals. First of all, I wanted to learn how to finish things better and properly and actually do that. But I also wanted to fail at goal number 1, because I wanted to learn how it is to not get there and what I could learn from that experience as a game developer to then try again and see if I can improve. So how did I decide to do that? What was the design of this experiment? I decided to make 12 games in 12 weeks, which basically meant that I would make 1 game every single week. However, that could mean 40 hours, 80 hours, depending on how much sleep I would let myself get. So there were some ethical concerns raised by my research supervisor, which looking back, I'm very glad that he raised those. So I limited myself to 2 days or 16 hours of development time to get a game to the finish line. Because it's pretty insane to do this 12 times in a row in 12 weeks, I decided to take a little break every 4 weeks. So technically it's 12 games in 14 weeks, but that doesn't sound as nice, so I kind of decided to not mention that. But I had a break every 4 weeks, which basically allowed me to look back on the games that I made, and if needed, make some adjustments to workflow or finally fix some technical issues that I had been running into, that sort of thing. Because this wasn't easy enough, I added some restrictions for myself. So I wanted each game to be unique, so I gave myself a creative team to give myself a little bit of direction. And I didn't just want to make 12 platformers, replace some assets, and then call them 12 unique games. I really wanted to explore some more stuff. Each game had to be shared online. So after the deadline has passed, the only thing I was allowed to do was publish it to itch. I wasn't allowed to make any changes after that deadline. So once it's published, it exists, and I wasn't allowed to change anything about it anymore. Spoiler alert, that's something I regretted. And I had to make everything yourself, because again, it wasn't hard enough yet, so more restrictions equals more better or something. So I had to do everything myself. And I foolishly assumed that my experience with doing stuff like Ludendare and game jams would help me. But I usually did a couple of those a year and had to have quite some recovery time every time I did one. So doing them 12 times in a row, well, who would have guessed that's not the same? So, yeah. To do this experiment, I decided to use the Godot game engine. I was already a sponsor of the engine before starting this, but it is something that I just had some experience with, and this experiment wasn't necessarily about learning new tools, but more about getting more from the ones that I already knew and exploring game development in general. So Godot really fit my use case very well because it's lightweight and it's easy to just make a game and export it to web, which again made sharing it online way easier as well. So what did I end up making? Well, I ended up making quite a bit because, well, I made 12 weeks and 12 games. So I want to go over them really quick just to sort of showcase, highlight the different sort of thing that you can make even in a limited amount of time. So the first game, called Dual Dice, it's a game very much inspired by Gwent from the Witcher series, but way easier. It's just you get a bunch of dice, you duel on AI, and that's been sort of a fun exploration, a little bit more strategy and programming AI and stuff. So that's cool. This one was quite challenging, so the next one was way easier. This one just one bit and one button. It's just a little you protect the planet game in which you just shoot with one button, and every time you shoot, the little robot guy goes in the opposite direction. The third game I made was a multiplayer game, because again, why make things easy? This is a game that I let my students play, and as you will notice in the bottom left corner, it's two people holding one controller. So you pretty much have either the left or the right side of the controller, and then you play a Super Smash Bros. Like game in which you try to kill the other player, which is very fun if you also not just have the battle on screen, but also the battle of who gets to hold the controller. Game number 4, called Reckless. Naming games is hard, but this title I thought was pretty clever because it's a challenging drifting game in which you should wreck less, I think. It's just a fun little drifting game that kind of mocks you if you sucked at it. Game number 5, the most popular one. This one is called Knip-Knop, which is basically the Dutch word for cutting something with scissors. It's just a little scissor moving along a shape, and you have to cut it in equal pieces by just hitting a button. This was by far the most popular one on my itch page. Game number 6, a platformer about a frog which blasts itself through the level, so I called it Blog. Again, naming games is hard. But it was quite fun. Game number 7 was a game nobody understood. It's a game, well, I'm not sure it's even a game, but it's about learning polyrhythms for musicians. So you basically set the rhythm for each one of your hands, you set the BPM, it visualizes it, and then you basically have to Guitar Hero it and do stuff to make it sync up, which is very fun, and nobody understood it. The next one, it's Snake, but you aren't locked to the grid. You either curve left or right based on whether you're holding a button. And occasionally, if you eat one of the candies, which should happen in just a sec, which has a different color, your snake changes direction, which again, nobody understood. Game number 10, called Hanging Around, my personal favorite. It's very much inspired by like a Spider-Man game. It's, again, just one button. All you have to do is hold it, and then you attach to something, and then you swing yourself to the end of the level. And it has like Mario Maker style death markers, which was, in my opinion, the best one. I'm going to show you just a little bit more of it. Yay. Okay. Second to last one, called Heartless, twin stick, top-down shooter, but your health is also your ammunition. So you basically have a limited amount of ammunition to kill enemies and get the highest score. I really wanted to make something a bit more juicy and fun, so this was a great way to do that. And then finally, this is one called Clocked. I did this because some of my students organized a game jam, and I participated in it, which was really fun. They didn't let me win, which I thought was a very bold move, but I can assure you it did not affect their grades. So yeah, that's all I made. So I kind of now want to go over the struggles and the lessons I learned while doing this experiment. Hopefully you can learn something from them, because it's, again, a very fun experiment. So first of all, when you're working on this as a solo developer, there is a constant internal fight that you kind of have between the designer and the producer. The designer wants to be creative, they want to add stuff to the game, they have constantly new ideas, but the same person is also the one responsible for getting this game to the finish line. So this is a great exercise in learning like self-discipline and self-regulation in getting your games to the finish line and understanding how much time it actually takes to finish a game. Looking back, I kind of figured it out somewhat, at least for my workflow during this experiment. I allowed myself 1 hour of brainstorming for every single project. So I generated a team by either asking friends or using like an online game jam team generator. And then I would allow myself 1 hour to brainstorm ideas for that specific team. I would then allow myself the time to develop the main mechanic or the toy, which would pretty much round out the first day. So 5 to 6 hours to get that fun thing, that fun core of the game design done and interested to play around with. And then pretty much the rest of the time was spent actually finishing it. The second day was getting UI, getting the entire game loop, getting like a high score, juiciness, anything like that, which, looking back, is a very valuable lesson about how I will plan my future project as well. I never crossed that 16-hour threshold that I set for myself. However, I did learn that 16 hours is absolutely not 2 days. In my case, I find it quite difficult next to like a full-time job to spend 2 entire days working on something and not be completely burned out. So I rarely actually had 2 8-hour days and a social life. I just had game dev time spread across pretty much 4 or 5 days every single week, which makes it quite difficult to recharge a little bit before you dive into the next project the week after. So I would recommend either limiting yourself a little bit more in time or taking a little bit more time in general to spend these 16 hours in. Weirdly enough, I did really like that time pressure. Every time I worked on the game, I had a literal timer counting down the minutes and seconds of time that I still had left, which freaked me the hell out the first couple of games, and I was very scared of it. And then at some point that kind of flipped a little bit, because instead of seeing time tick away, I saw it more as, oh, I have still 4 hours left and I'm pretty much done there, and there's so much more I could do. So weirdly enough, having that timer running actually became very useful, and I stick to it even now when working on other stuff outside of this experiment. But also the fact that and on Sunday nights I had to be done. And that time pressure really forces you to actually get stuff finished and really helps that producer inside of you to kick the designer's ass and actually get this game to the finish line. Looking back, weirdly enough, I also discovered what I dubbed the sine wave of complexity. With every single project that I struggled with, the game after was way easier. The first game, the dual dice, was quite complex in terms of AI and strategy. The second one bit, one button. If you noticed when I showed the games that there were actually 11 games that I showed you, that's because one game didn't make it to the finish line. More on that later. But that really hurt my self-esteem and my confidence in my abilities. So the game after was Snake, just to sort of get myself a little bit more confident in my skills again. So the sine wave of complexity is something that I, looking back, found out about. Next, emotional attachment is a double-edged sword, which probably doesn't come as a surprise, but it's great that we as creative people put a lot of ourselves into the things that we make. It makes you very attached to those things, which also means that if somebody thinks it's shit, they think you are shit. At least that's how I see that. So there is a lot of well, double-edginess, I guess, to making stuff and being emotionally attached to it. That doesn't mean we should not share it. That doesn't mean we should not do it. It just means that we kind of need to prepare ourselves a little bit for that. Because in the end, again, looking back, I did realize that this emotional attachment kind of forced me a little bit into taking less risks. A lot of the games that I ended up making were not necessarily very innovative or new or anything like that. And I kind of stick to the more conventional and well-known stuff because there is a certain risk in trying something completely new, failing at that. And then, well, because I was very sort of public and vocal about this experiment, people asked me how it's going. And if I had to then, well, tell them I failed, that felt like personal failure. So emotional attachment is great because the comments that I got that were positive hit me really hard, but the comments that were not so positive are also very hard hitting. So it's a little bit of both. Yeah, I kind of alluded to this earlier. Not looking back is a mistake. You should be allowed to change your games after you publish them. Who would have thought? Every single game I made was too difficult. Every single game could have used a better tutorial. And some games just should have been balanced better. The problem is, if you have 16 hours of development time, you're not doing any playtests before releasing. It's just development, and, well, send and pray. And sometimes it worked, and often it didn't. So I've had some students of mine playtest the game that were very much discouraged for continuing to play my games, and also then used those as ammunition for their own shitty games they made because, well, you also made shitty games, Mathijs, so why should we be better? Which I thought was very clever and annoying. What really helped, though, is that every single time I finished a project, when I realized I made mistakes or realized some things could have changed or should be changed, I was already neck deep in the next project because there was no time to reevaluate stuff. I was already 8 hours into the next project, so, well, shit happens. Who would have thought that taking breaks is a good thing? Turns out it is. I'm really glad my research supervisor advised me to take breaks and more frequent breaks. Every single fourth game in a marathon, I was completely burned out. I didn't want to do the experiment. I didn't want to do a fourth time before taking a break. And generally speaking, those games are, to me, less creative, less inspired, less good compared to the ones that are immediately after a break or the second one after a break. It is important for breaks. You regain some energy. That's nice. However, in this experiment, I also noticed that every time I took a break, I was completely out of the flow of making a game in a week. And I had to sort of relearn that again, even after the break was just 1 week. But I had to relearn that again to then be able to actually get stuff to the finish line, which was kind of strange, but it broke my flow state in a way. Also, who would have thought? Don't make everything yourself. That's not the smartest idea if you only have 16 hours of development time and you want to finish something. So I followed this rule the first game, and then by the second game, I kind of broke it immediately and never followed it again. I used asset packs. I went on Edge. I looked up audio stuff, things like that. So the core of the games was always still my own work, but I quickly decided that if I really wanted to adhere to this rule, I should either need more time every single week or take more than 1 week, and that was not in the spirit of the experiment. So yeah, there's a benefit to people making assets that you can use. Thank you, Kenny. Very much appreciated. Yeah, another thing that I learned is that no and good enough are crucial in an experiment like this and getting your games to the finish line. Perfection is the enemy of getting stuff done, in a way. However, it led to a lot of bad practices. Like I mentioned before, my background is in software engineering. I am horrified by some of the code that I had to write during this experiment. But the thing is, I was very much aware of the fact that after this experiment, I was never going to touch this game again, so who cares? I was just writing the most shitty, awful code that would break anytime you didn't follow the happy path. It had to be done. It had to be done in an experiment like this. If you have an experiment or experience in game jams, you know how it goes. I was aware of the fact that I was doing this, though, so in future projects, I would very much not do it exactly in the same way I did during this experiment. They are essential, but they lead to bad practices. Another lesson is that not focusing on commercial success doesn't mean you make bad games. I think there is a lot to say for looking for trends in the market and kind of jumping on them if you want to survive as an indie game developer. For me, in this experiment, I was very much not focused on like any commercial viability. I just wanted to make games and finish them. That didn't mean I made only bad games, or that didn't mean that there wasn't any appeal to them. Actually, I got roughly 2,000 page views on my HIO profile in the 4 months that I did this experiment in, which for me, who had 0 HIO presence before this experiment, was quite cool and quite good. I got a lot of nice comments on the games that I made. I had the fortunate position that I had a lot of students that would like to playtest my games, and got a lot of nice feedback from them, probably because they were scared, because I am their teacher after all. But still, fake nice comments are still nice comments, and people like messaging me at midnight on Discord like I just had to complete the game. So that was very, very nice. There's a little Easter egg at the end of blog, so spoiler I guess for that, but you should still play it. Yeah, I alluded to it a little bit earlier as well. Sharing is very scary. Putting your game in other people's hands is the most terrifying thing ever, because you made a baby and now people are going to tell you your baby sucks. That's not great. However, it is very necessary, because that would, well, first of all, allow you to make your baby not suck anymore. But also, sometimes people tell you that your baby is very cool and very nice and they want to keep playing it. I did a lot of playtests with students of mine. They were playing my game. Sometimes I walked into a classroom after finishing a game the night before, and my students were already playing it, even without me mentioning it. So that is a very nice experience to have, and it's so rewarding and it's so gratifying and satisfying to see people enjoy playing your games. But of course, you do have to finish them so people can actually do that. Okay, so finally, what the hell happened with game number 8? As you noticed, I only showcased 11 games during my highlight reel. Game number 8 was at the end of the second marathon. I was completely exhausted. Turns out doing 8 of those games in a row is quite intense. And this is the only game I just simply wasn't able to finish. I had an idea, I started working on it. I just couldn't get it to a point where I thought it was any kind of fun. And after spending an entire day, so half of my development time on it, I either could like push myself and cross that threshold of spending more than 16 hours on this particular game, or I could just sort of admit defeat to myself. And I think it's important as a developer to allow you to do that, to sort of create that little bit of safe space that you need to admit defeat to yourself and cancel something that you are proud of, or just simply doesn't work, or you already spend a lot of time on. I think failure in that way is an important skill to develop as a developer. And it became a lot easier for me to admit that failure, because the games I made before that were quite successful and I was able to get to the finish line. So it hurt my pride and confidence a little bit less. But it was just sort of bad timing, lack of creativity, pressured by time, and it was too far from playable. So I had to cancel it, which, looking back, I was very proud of. But this is how I felt. So to wrap up this talk, I can imagine a lot of people with game development experience in this audience, people who have done it professionally or as a hobby, that are thinking to themselves with everything that I mentioned that, yeah, this is obvious, duh. However, I think there is a very big difference between listening to me or listening to any developer about their experience and experiencing it yourself. I think it's so much more valuable as a learning experience to go through this yourself and learn from that experience, rather than listen to me ramble on about how I did it and what I learned from this. So I always, to everyone that I talk to about this little experience, recommend doing it yourself, because it's super awesome. You get a lot of fun games. You can do it in the context of game jams. You can do it in the context of how I did it. Maybe allow yourself a little bit more breaks and a little bit more time every now and then. But it's such a fun and worthwhile experience to go through and experiment. You learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about game development, both for Godot in particular, but also you as a game developer yourself. So highly recommend doing something like this. If you need an accountability buddy, hit me up. I'll gladly send you a Discord message on Sunday night asking for what game you made this week, as long as you don't do the same thing with me, because I'm done. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to me ramble about something that I'm very passionate about. If you want to get in touch, check out the games on my HIO page, or send me a message. Please don't use my email to sign me up for weird subscriptions. Thank you.
Yeah. We have time for like 2 questions. If someone really wants to ask a question, I see 2 questions over there. Maybe a third if we're quick.
Oh, awesome! You're more engaged than most of my students.
Awesome stuff. I have a question to poke you in the pain point.
Uh-oh.
What was the main reason of game number 8 not finishing? Was it like too complicated or some technical issues or whatever?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, I think the honest answer is that I was just completely demotivated at that point. I was just tired. I was looking forward to the break, the week off, the week after. And I did spend a decent amount of time getting something to playable. It just took way more effort than the games prior. And it just wasn't fun. That was kind of the main thing. I couldn't get it to a point in which I enjoyed it. And then knowing how much time it would still take me to actually get it to the finish line, I just wouldn't be proud of what I had made. So I kind of had to cancel it, in my opinion, just to like be honest to myself. Yeah. But thank you for the question.
All right. I think there was a question somewhere. Oh, there, yeah.
Hi. I really wonder how this experiment changed your overall approach to game development. Let's say you are starting like maybe a long running project. Would you, after doing this, change the way you structure your work on it or do something else what you didn't do before? Thanks.
Yeah, great question. It definitely influenced my approach to it. I started a little bit bigger project recently, and I started that project basically doing this. So the first 16 hours was just getting to something that's fun and getting that playable and putting that in people's hands. And afterwards, sort of kind of deciding whether or not I wanted to continue with this. So I think getting to a point where you can quickly validate an idea and whether or not it's fun is extremely important, even for the bigger games that you're working on. So I decided to do that, and then afterwards I pretty much threw away all of that and started from scratch to do it properly. So like actually do like proper programming instead of just getting it working. And I think that worked really well. And now I'm at a point with that project where I'm still excited because I know that it's good, somewhat good at least, but also allow myself the time to make it properly good in a way.
All right, last question.
Hi, great talk, by the way. It was really, really good. When it comes to someone that is learning from scratch, from zero, would you recommend me to at least know everything about, or everything, quote unquote, about Godot and how it works before jumping to do a game, or just doing a game on the go while I learn stuff and do the 2 things at the same time?
Yeah, I don't wait working on stuff until you feel confident enough that you know everything about it to do it. I think for most game developers, we don't know everything about a project before we start working on it. It's actually quite fun to sort of explore the project while working on it and see where it takes you. So my recommendation would definitely be, even if you don't feel confident in a tool that you're going to use, like the Godot engine, you'll gain that confidence while working on that stuff. So I would rather have you work on something that you enjoy and learn through that than spend more time watching tutorials just so that you know that a certain function on a node exists, because otherwise, whatever, you know? So yeah, just go make games. You will learn along the way. And we all did, for sure.
Thank you.